The flatline alarm screamed through Trauma Bay 1. Blood pooled beneath the gurney where a man with no name lay dying, his dog tag stripped, his identity classified, and 4 minutes standing between his brain and permanent death. "Get that nurse out of my OR." Dr. Preston Whitmore's voice cut through the chaos like a scalpel through infected tissue. But Rachel Devereaux didn't move, couldn't move, because she'd seen those scars before. She knew that tattoo, the trident, inked above his heart. And she knew, with absolute certainty, that the famous trauma surgeon was about to kill a American hero with the wrong diagnosis. Then the doors exploded open. 6 men in tactical gear poured into the trauma bay, and the one in front, a battle-hardened SEAL commander with silver at his temples, stopped dead in his tracks. His eyes found Rachel. His face went white, and in front of everyone, he snapped to attention and saluted. "Commander Devereaux, Valkyrie." His voice cracked. "Whatever you need, we're yours." The monitors kept screaming. The clock kept ticking. And every doctor in that room realized they had made a terrible mistake. The night shift at Centara, Virginia Beach General Hospital began the way it always did, with Rachel Devereaux arriving 45 minutes early. She parked her 10-year-old Honda Civic in the same spot she'd claimed for the past 8 months. Back row, corner space, clear sightline to both exits. Old habits, she told herself. Just old habits. The October air carried the salt bite of the Atlantic as she walked toward the emergency department entrance. Her scrubs were navy blue, darker than regulation required, but nobody had complained. Nobody really noticed her at all, which was exactly how she preferred it. At 41 years old, Rachel had learned that invisibility was its own kind of armor. She swiped her badge and entered through the staff entrance, immediately cataloging the environment the way she'd been trained to do since she was 23 years old. 2 security guards at the main desk, one scrolling his phone, one watching the Orioles game on mute. 3 nurses at the central station, Dr. Patel finishing paperwork from the day shift. The faint smell of industrial cleaner and stale coffee that seemed to permeate every hospital in America. "Hey, Rachel." Destiny Williams, charge nurse, and the closest thing Rachel had to a friend here, looked up from her computer. "You're early." Again, traffic was light. Destiny raised an eyebrow. "Girl, you live 6 blocks away." Rachel allowed herself a small smile, the kind that didn't quite reach her eyes but was warm enough to pass for normal. "I like to be prepared." Destiny shook her head, but there was affection in it. "Well, prepare yourself for a quiet night. Census is down. Dr. Patel's finishing up," and she lowered her voice. "Whitmore's on call, so try to stay invisible." Rachel's left hand twitched involuntarily. She covered it by adjusting her sleeve, the long sleeve she wore even in summer, even when the other nurses complained about the heat. The fabric hid the scars that ran from her wrist to her elbow. Scars that told a story she would never share in this place. "I'm always invisible," Rachel said. She meant it as a joke. It didn't land as one. The next 3 hours passed in the comfortable rhythm of routine medicine. A teenager with a skateboarding injury. An elderly man whose chest pain turned out to be indigestion. A mother whose toddler had shoved a Lego up his nose. Rachel removed it with steady hands and a calm voice that made the child giggle instead of cry. "You're good with kids," the mother said, surprised. Rachel thought of the children in Kandahar, the ones she couldn't save, the ones she still saw when she closed her eyes. "I've had practice," she said simply. At 10:47 p.m., she took her break in the small courtyard behind the ambulance bay. The stars were bright tonight, brighter than they ever got in the mountains of Afghanistan, where dust and smoke had painted the sky a permanent gray. She pulled out her phone and looked at the photo she kept as her wallpaper. Not a family portrait, not a vacation memory. Just a simple image of a Navy SEAL trident pin resting on a folded American flag. 18 years, she thought. 7 deployments. 23 lives saved by her own hands. 116 by her orders. And now she was a night shift nurse in Virginia Beach, taking Legos out of toddlers' noses. Her grandmother's voice echoed in her memory. "The measure of a person isn't in the battles they win, Rachel. It's in how they live when the fighting's done." She wasn't sure she believed that, but she was trying. Her pager buzzed. She checked the screen. Trauma alert. Ada. 6 minutes. Coast Guard medevac. Blast injuries. Critical. Rachel stood up slowly. Her left hand tingled phantom pain from nerves that had been damaged 12 years ago in a concrete cell in the Korangal Valley. She rolled her shoulders, took a breath, and walked back toward the emergency department. She didn't know it yet, but the next 4 hours would change everything. Dr. Preston Whitmore III arrived in the trauma bay like a man expecting applause. He swept through the automatic doors with his white coat billowing behind him, his Rolex catching the fluorescent light, his perfectly styled hair unmoved by urgency. At 44, he was the youngest acting chief of emergency services in the hospital's history, a fact he mentioned at least twice per shift. "What do we have?" He didn't look at the nurses as he asked. He never did. "Coast Guard medevac inbound," Destiny reported. "Male patient, mid-40s, severe blast injuries, multiple shrapnel wounds, extensive burns to the right side, unresponsive, BP crashing, at 4 minutes, burns and blood loss, textbook hypovolemic shock." Whitmore was already mentally composing his case report, the one he'd submit to the American Journal of Trauma Surgery with his name in bold at the top. "Prep for aggressive fluid resuscitation and exploratory laparotomy. I want the OR on standby." His dog tags were removed, Destiny added. "Identity classified." That got Whitmore's attention. He smiled the self-satisfied smile of a man who saw opportunity in everything. "Military. Perfect. Make sure someone's documenting this. The board loves our veterans' outreach metrics." Rachel stood at the edge of the trauma bay, checking supplies, IV lines, blood products, surgical trays. Her hands moved automatically, but her mind was elsewhere. Blast injuries, unresponsive, dog tags removed. Something cold settled in her stomach. The helicopter's roar announced itself before the radio crackled. Through the windows, Rachel watched the Coast Guard MH-60 Jayhawk settle onto the helipad, its rotors whipping debris across the concrete. The doors burst open. 2 flight medics rushed the gurney through the trauma bay entrance, and Rachel saw him for the first time, the man whose life was measured in minutes. His face was obscured by blood and burns, but she recognized the body type instantly. Lean, dense muscle built for endurance, not show. The kind of physique you only got from years of swimming in full gear, running with rucksacks, and fighting in conditions that would break ordinary men. And there, above his heart, barely visible through the shredded remains of his shirt, the ink of a Navy SEAL trident. "Talk to me!" Whitmore positioned himself at the head of the gurney, already reaching for his stethoscope. "Male, approximately 45. Found unconscious at a training facility in Dam Neck. Blast mechanism, unknown. GCS-3 on scene. Burns covering approximately 30% of body surface. Right side. Penetrating abdominal trauma, multiple sites. BP 60 over palp. Heart rate 140. We've pushed 2 liters of saline. No response." Whitmore nodded, his confidence unshaken. "Classic hemorrhagic shock. Prep him for surgery. I want his pupils." Rachel's voice was quiet, but it cut through the noise. Everyone stopped. Whitmore turned slowly, his expression shifting from surprise to annoyance. "Excuse me?" Rachel stepped forward, her eyes fixed on the patient. "His pupils are unequal. Left is 4 millimeters, right is 7. That's not blood loss. Thank you for your input, sweetheart." Whitmore's voice dripped with condescension. "But I think I know the difference between surgical shock and it's a blown pupil." Rachel met his eyes for the first time since she'd started working here. Combined with blast mechanism, unresponsiveness despite fluid resuscitation, and the bruising behind his right ear, he's got an epidural hematoma. He's bleeding inside his skull. The silence in the trauma bay was absolute. Whitmore's face reddened. "I'm sorry. I must have missed the memo where nursing school started teaching differential diagnosis. The abdominal wounds are the priority. We control the bleeding. We save the patient. That's trauma 101. The abdominal wounds are survivable." Rachel's voice remained calm, But there was something beneath it, something that made the other nurses exchange glances. The brain bleed will kill him in 4 minutes if it's not addressed. Maybe less. Are you questioning my medical judgment? Whitmore stepped closer, using his height to intimidate. In front of my team? In my trauma bay? Rachel didn't step back, didn't flinch, just looked up at him with eyes that had seen things his nightmares couldn't imagine. I'm trying to save his life. And I'm telling you to stay in your lane. He turned to Destiny. Get her out of here. Prep the patient for surgery. Now. Dr. Rachel started. Out! Whitmore's shout echoed off the tile walls. One more word and you're suspended. Is that clear? The monitors beeped. The patient's heart rate climbed higher. And Rachel Devereaux, Commander Rachel Devereaux, call sign Valkyrie, 18-year veteran of naval special warfare, stood in a room full of people who had no idea they were watching a hero die. She had 4 minutes, maybe less. Rachel stepped back from the gurney. But she didn't leave. She positioned herself against the wall, back protected, exits visible, hands clasped in front of her in what looked like submission but was actually a ready stance. She'd stood this way in briefing rooms with admirals, in bunkers under mortar fire, in the blood-soaked hold of a Chinook helicopter with 6 wounded operators and 30 minutes until exfil. She'd learned to wait, to watch, to be ready. But God, it was hard to watch someone die for the wrong reasons. The trauma team moved around the patient like a choreographed disaster. Whitmore barked orders, his voice too loud, his movements too theatrical. He was performing surgery for an audience that didn't exist, while the real emergency, the swelling inside the man's skull, went untreated. 3 minutes, Rachel calculated. Maybe 3.5. Her left hand trembled. She pressed it against her thigh, willing the shaking to stop. The memories came anyway. Korangal Valley, 2012. The concrete cell that smelled like blood and diesel. The men who took turns asking questions she would never answer. Where are the SEALs positioned? What's the extraction point? Tell us. And the pain stops. 9 days. She'd held out for 9 days. They'd shattered 3 fingers on her left hand, burned her arm from wrist to elbow with a heated blade, done things she still couldn't speak about to her therapist. And she'd never broken. Not once. On the 9th night, she'd killed 2 guards with the chain from her own restraints, crawled 3 kilometers through enemy territory with a fever of 104 and a dislocated shoulder, made contact with a patrol from SEAL Team 6 who found her collapsed behind a compound wall, barely breathing but still clutching the intelligence she'd gathered during her captivity. Intelligence that had saved 43 American lives. They'd given her the Navy Cross for that. Pinned it on her chest in a private ceremony at Walter Reed while her hands were still bandaged and her nightmares were just beginning. But the Navy Cross didn't matter to Preston Whitmore III. In his eyes, she was just a nurse who didn't know her place. BP's dropping. A voice cut through her memories. 52/30, Whitmore swore. More fluids. Where's my blood? It won't help. Rachel said it quietly, to herself. But Destiny heard. The charge nurse moved closer, her voice a whisper. Rachel, what do you know? Rachel watched the monitor, watched the patient's oxygen saturation begin to fall. He needs a burr hole. Emergency decompression. If we don't relieve the pressure in his skull in the next, she checked the clock, 2 minutes. He's gone. A burr hole? Here? That's neurosurgery. Whitmore would never. Whitmore doesn't know how. Rachel turned to face Destiny, and something in her expression made the charge nurse take a step back. I do. What are you talking about? Before Rachel could answer, the trauma bay doors crashed open again. But this time, it wasn't medical personnel. 6 men in tactical gear poured through the entrance. Their movements were fluid, coordinated the unmistakable choreography of special operations. They wore civilian clothes beneath their plate carriers. But there was no mistaking what they were. SEALs. Active duty by the look of them. Armed. And absolutely not supposed to be here. The man in front was in his early 40s, with a jaw like granite and silver threading through his dark hair. Commander's insignia visible on his chest. His eyes swept the room with the cold efficiency of someone who had walked into 1,000 dangerous situations and walked out of all of them. "Where is he?" His voice was quiet, but it carried. "Where's Captain Garrett?" Whitmore puffed up like a threatened bird. "This is a restricted area. You can't just—" The commander ignored him completely. His eyes found the patient on the gurney. Then they swept across the room, cataloging threats and allies with practiced speed, and stopped on Rachel. For a moment, nothing happened. The monitors beeped. The patient's life slipped away second by second. The SEALs held their positions. Then the commander's face went white. Not pale. White. The color of a man who had just seen a ghost. "Holy shit," he breathed. Rachel felt the world tilt. Because she knew that face. Knew those eyes. Knew the scar on his left temple where shrapnel had grazed him during an ambush in Kandahar province. 12 years ago, she'd carried him 2 kilometers through hostile territory with a bullet in her own leg. 12 years ago, she'd saved his life. And now, Commander James Warhorse Castellano was staring at her like she'd risen from the dead. Time stopped. At least, that's how it felt to everyone watching. Commander Castellano crossed the trauma bay in 5 long strides, his tactical boots silent on the tile floor. His men parted around him like water around a stone. Whitmore opened his mouth to protest, but something in the SEAL's eyes made him swallow his words. Castellano stopped 3 feet from Rachel, and then, in a movement so crisp it could have been pulled from a parade ground, he snapped to attention and rendered a formal salute. "Commander Devereaux." His voice cracked on her name. "Valkyrie, I served under you in Kandahar. You carried me 2 clicks with a bullet in your leg." He held the salute, his eyes bright with emotion. "Whatever you need were yours." The silence that followed was deafening. Rachel felt the weight of every stare in the room. Destiny's shock, the nurse's confusion, and Whitmore's face twisted in something between disbelief and horror as his entire worldview collapsed around him. "Commander?" The word rippled through the trauma team like a shockwave. Rachel didn't return the salute. Not yet. Instead, she stepped forward and placed her hand on Castellano's shoulder, a gesture between equals, between warriors. "Stand down, Warhorse." Her voice was soft but steady. "There's a man dying behind you who needs us more than he needs ceremony." Castellano lowered his arm, but his posture didn't change. "That's Captain Cole Garrett, SEAL Team 4. Someone sold out his position during a training exercise that was actually an active op. He's the only one who saw the traitor's face." His jaw tightened. "We need him alive, Commander. The Navy needs him alive." Rachel looked at the monitors. The patient's Garrett's vitals were crashing. Oxygen saturation, 82%. Heart rate, 160 and climbing. His brain was herniating. 90 seconds. Maybe less. "He has an epidural hematoma," she said calmly. "I need to perform an emergency burr hole decompression. Right now. Right here." "The hell you will!" Whitmore finally found his voice. He stepped forward, pointing at Rachel with a trembling finger. "I don't know what kind of game this is, but I am the attending physician. I am in charge of this patient. And I will not allow some nurse to. Dr. Whitmore." Castellano's voice was ice. "I have 8 years of combat experience. I've watched corpsmen do more with a Leatherman and a prayer than your medical degree could accomplish in a lifetime. If Commander Devereaux says she can save him, then you need to step back and let her work." "Commander? She's a nurse." "She's a Navy commander. 05, Special Amphibious Reconnaissance Corpsman, qualified trauma surgeon, and the most decorated female operator in naval special warfare history." Castellano didn't blink. "She has performed this procedure 23 times in combat conditions. How many have you done, Doctor?" Whitmore's mouth opened, closed, opened again. "None," Rachel answered for him. "He's never done one, probably never even seen one outside of a textbook." She was already moving toward the supply cabinet, her mind calculating doses and instruments. "Destiny, I need a 14-gauge needle, betadine, lidocaine, and a Hudson brace if you have one. If not, get me the closest thing to a hand drill this hospital has." "You can't do this." Whitmore's voice had risen to a near shriek. This is my trauma bay. My patient. I'll have your license. Dr. Whitmore. Castellano stepped between the surgeon and Rachel, and the other SEALs moved to flank him. You have two choices. You can step back and let Commander Devereaux save this man's life, or you can continue to obstruct, and I will have you physically removed from this room. What happens after that depends entirely on how much noise you want to make when I tell Naval Criminal Investigative Service about the pharmaceutical kickbacks you've been taking from Meridian Pharma. The color drained from Whitmore's face. Yeah, Castellano said quietly. We know about that. We know about the 3 overdose deaths you covered up. We know about a lot of things. He leaned closer. Now step back and pray to God that Commander Devereaux is as good as I remember. Rachel returned to the gurney with supplies in hand. Destiny appeared at her side, moving in silent sync the way good nurses always did in crisis. Talk to me, Rach, Destiny whispered. I'm going to drill a hole in his skull to relieve the pressure. Rachel's hands were steady now, steadier than they'd been in months. This was what she was made for. This was who she was. It's going to look barbaric. Don't let that throw you. She pulled on surgical gloves, adjusted the overhead light, and looked down at the man she was about to save. Hold on, Captain, she thought. I didn't crawl out of that cell in Kandahar to let you die in a hospital in Virginia Beach. 60 seconds, she announced to the room. Everyone not essential. Clear the bay. Destiny, you're with me. Warhorse, keep everyone out until I'm done. Castellano nodded once. You heard the commander. Move. Rachel took a breath, steadied herself, and began. Rachel worked with the precision of a surgeon and the speed of a combat medic. She'd performed this procedure in the back of a bouncing Humvee in Fallujah, in a mud brick compound in Helmand Province with mortar rounds falling 50 meters away, in the cargo hold of a C-130 flying through a sandstorm with the cabin lights flickering and 3 wounded operators depending on her hands. A fully equipped trauma bay in Virginia Beach was practically a luxury. Betadine. She held out her hand, and Destiny slapped the bottle into it without hesitation. Good. The charge nurse was adapting, falling into the rhythm of Rachel's command presence. That was rare in civilian medicine. The betadine went on in 3 quick swipes. Rachel located her landmarks by touch the temporal bone, just above the ear, where the bone was thinnest, where she could create a window into the skull without damaging the brain beneath. Lidocaine. He might still have some pain response, and I don't want him moving. The injection went in smooth. 20 seconds to take effect. She used that time to check his vitals again. Oxygen sat. 78% and falling. She was running out of time. Hand drill. She extended her palm. Destiny placed the Hudson brace in her grip, a hand-cranked drill that looked like it belonged in a Civil War surgical tent. But it would work. It had worked before. Warhorse. Rachel didn't look up. Your man, what's his blood type? Oh, negative. Castellano's voice came from the doorway, where he'd positioned himself like a sentinel. Get your boys to start a donation line. I'm going to need blood for the abdominal repairs after I fix his brain. Copy that. He turned to bark orders at his team. Rachel positioned the drill, said a prayer she hadn't spoken since Afghanistan, and began to turn. The sound of bone cracking was something you never got used to. Destiny went pale but held her position, hands ready with gauze and suction. The other nurses had retreated to the edges of the room, watching in horrified fascination. Whitmore was gone, fled to his office, probably already calling his family's lawyers. Rachel didn't care. She had stopped caring about Preston Whitmore the moment she'd seen the blown pupil. Almost there. She felt the resistance change as the drill broke through the inner table of the skull. Suction ready. 3, 2. Dark blood burst from the hole like a geyser. Destiny moved in with suction, clearing the field. Rachel watched the pressure gauge in her mind, not a real instrument, but the mental calculation she'd developed over years of field medicine. The blood flow slowed. The pressure equalized. The monitors chirped. Oxygen saturation. 82%. Then 85. Then 90. Heart rate coming down. Destiny breathed. 140. 130. 120. Rachel allowed herself one moment, just one, to close her eyes in relief. 24, she thought. That's 24 burr holes in my career. 24 lives saved from bleeding inside their own skulls. He's not out of the woods. She opened her eyes and began preparing for the next phase. The abdominal wounds still need repair, but his brain won't kill him now. She looked at Castellano. Get your blood donors ready. This is going to be a long night. Castellano nodded, but his eyes were fixed on something behind Rachel. Commander. His voice had changed. Harder. Tactical. We have a problem. Rachel turned. Through the trauma bay windows, she could see 4 men approaching the emergency department. They wore dark suits and moved with the confident swagger of law enforcement. Credentials hung from their necks. FBI. By the look of them. But something was wrong. Rachel's combat instincts, the ones she'd tried to bury for 8 months, screamed to life. Their shoes were wrong. Tactical boots poorly disguised as dress shoes. Their watches were wrong, positioned on the inside of the wrist, where operators wore them to avoid reflection. And there were no visible radio earpieces, something every real federal agent would have in an active situation. Those aren't FBI, she said quietly. Castellano was already reaching for his sidearm. No, they're not. Rachel's mind raced through the scenario. 4 hostile operators, 31 civilians in the ER, 1 critical patient who couldn't be moved, a team of SEALs who were technically unauthorized to engage on domestic soil, and her, a Navy commander in nurse's scrubs, with nothing but her training and her wits. They're here to finish what they started, Castellano said. Garrett saw the traitor. Someone wants him silenced. Rachel looked at Captain Garrett on the gurney, then at Destiny and the other nurses, then at the false FBI agents, now pushing through the main entrance, flashing credentials at the confused security guards. The people who are hardest to protect, her grandmother's voice echoed, are usually the ones who need it most. She made her decision. Destiny. Initiate contamination protocol. Tell them we have a possible chemical exposure in Trauma Bay 1. Lock down the wing. She turned to Castellano. Your men take positions at every entrance. Nobody gets in without my authorization. And you? Rachel rolled down her sleeves, straightened her scrubs, and became, once again, the invisible nurse that nobody noticed. I'm going to have a conversation with our visitors. The medication room was quiet. Rows of locked cabinets lined the walls, each one containing pharmaceuticals worth more than most cars. A single fluorescent light buzzed overhead, casting pale shadows across the tile floor. It was, Rachel thought, the perfect place for an ambush. She'd positioned herself at the far end, pretending to count pills, when the door opened behind her. Excuse me, ma'am. The voice was polite. Professional. Wrong. FBI. We need access to the trauma wing. Rachel turned slowly, keeping her hands visible. The man in the doorway was tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of face that was designed to be forgotten. His suit was expensive. His eyes were cold. Behind him, she could see his partner, a second man, similarly built, similarly dressed. 2 in the medication room. That meant 2 more somewhere else, probably approaching the trauma bay from another angle. I'm sorry, Rachel said, her voice soft, meek, the voice of a woman who had spent her whole life being overlooked. The trauma wing is locked down. Contamination protocol. You'll need to speak with hospital administration. The man smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. This is a federal matter. Lives are at stake. I understand. Rachel took a step backward toward the cabinet behind her. But the protocols are very clear. No one in or out until the all clear is given. The man's smile faded. He stepped into the room, and his partner followed, the door swinging shut behind them. Let me make this simple. The false agent reached into his jacket. You're going to take us to the patient in Trauma Bay 1. Now. Rachel's left hand trembled, but this time, it wasn't fear. It was anticipation. I don't think I will, she said. The man's hand came out of his jacket holding a suppressed pistol. His partner mirrored the movement. 2 weapons pointed at her center mass. Last chance, sweetheart. Where's the patient? Rachel reached behind her, fingers closing around a metal ivy pole leaning against the cabinet. My name, she said calmly. "Is Commander Rachel Devereaux, U.S. Navy." Call sign: Valkyrie. She moved. The IV pole came around in a horizontal arc, striking the lead man's gun hand with enough force to shatter his wrist. His weapon clattered to the floor. Before his partner could react, Rachel had already pivoted, driving the base of the pole into the second man's solar plexus with a thrust that dropped him to his knees. The first man tried to recover, reaching for her with his uninjured hand. Rachel caught his wrist, twisted, and felt the joint separate with a wet pop. She followed with a palm strike to his chin that snapped his head back and sent him crashing into the medication cabinet. The second man was getting up. Rachel spun, planted her foot, and delivered a side kick to his temple that put him down for good. 4 seconds. 2 men. 0 hesitation. She stood over them, breathing hard, feeling the familiar rush of combat adrenaline that she'd tried so hard to leave behind. Her hands had stopped shaking. They always did, when the fighting started. The door burst open. Castellano stood in the threshold, weapon drawn, his eyes sweeping the room. He took in the scene. The 2 unconscious men. The IV pole still gripped in Rachel's hands. The cold efficiency of the violence she'd unleashed. "Damn," he breathed. "You haven't lost a step." "The other 2? Rachel dropped the pole and knelt to zip-tie the unconscious men's wrists. "My boys intercepted them near the east entrance. They're secured." He holstered his weapon. These guys had encrypted phones. Military grade. Someone with serious access sent them. Rachel pulled a phone from the lead man's pocket. The screen showed a text conversation with a contact labeled simply, "Contractor. Target is Captain Cole Garrett. Trauma Bay 1. Eliminate and exfil. No witnesses." And above that, a message that made Rachel's blood run cold. "Payment confirmed. Position on SEAL Team 4 delivered. Cleanup authorized." Warhorse. Her voice was steady, but her mind was racing. This isn't just about Garrett. This is about all of SEAL Team 4. Whoever the mole is, they're selling out our people. Castellano's jaw tightened. "Then we need Garrett awake. He's the only one who can identify the traitor." Rachel looked toward the trauma bay. The patient was stable for now, but the abdominal wounds still needed repair, and there was no telling how long before more enemies arrived. She made her decision the way she'd made every decision in 18 years of service. Quickly, cleanly, without hesitation. "I'm going to finish the surgery," she said. "You're going to secure this hospital. And when Garrett wakes up, we're going to find the son of a bitch who did this." Castellano nodded once. "Copy that, Commander." He turned to leave, then stopped. "Hey, Valkyrie. Yeah? It's good to have you back." Rachel looked at her hands, the same hands that had healed the wounded and killed the enemy, that had been broken by torturers and rebuilt by surgeons, that had spent the last 8 months doing nothing more dangerous than taking vitals and changing bandages. "I never left," she said quietly. "I was just waiting." The surgery took 4 hours. Rachel worked with methodical precision, repairing the damage to Captain Garrett's abdomen 1 layer at a time. Destiny assisted, handing instruments without being asked, anticipating needs before they arose. The other nurses had overcome their shock and fallen into supporting roles, fetching blood from the SEAL-donated reserves, monitoring vitals, keeping the surgical field clear. It was, Rachel reflected, the best team she'd had since leaving the Navy. Through the windows, she could see Castellano's men maintaining their perimeter. NCIS had arrived within the hour, alerted by the encrypted phones recovered from the assassins. The hospital administrator, a severe woman named Margaret Chen, who had served as an army nurse in Desert Storm, had taken one look at the situation and declared herself fully in support of whatever Commander Devereaux requires. Whitmore had not reappeared. Rumor had it he was locked in his office, on the phone with his lawyers and his father. Rachel didn't care. She had a patient to save. At 3:47 a.m., she placed the final suture, stepped back from the table, and allowed herself to breathe. "He's stable," she said. "The brain bleed is contained. The abdominal wounds are repaired, and his vitals are strong. He should wake up within a few hours." The trauma bay erupted in quiet applause. Destiny had tears running down her cheeks. Even the stoic SEALs at the door allowed themselves small nods of respect. Castellano approached, his face drawn with exhaustion but his eyes bright with something like hope. "You did it," he said. Again. "We did it." Rachel pulled off her surgical gloves. "It was a team effort." "Bullshit." Castellano's voice cracked. 12 years ago, you carried me out of a kill zone with a bullet in your leg. Tonight, you saved my friend's life and took down 2 assassins with an IV pole. This was all you, Commander." Rachel thought about arguing, thought about deflecting. But she was tired, the bone-deep tired that came from 18 years of war and 8 months of pretending to be someone she wasn't. "I just did what needed to be done," she said finally. Same as always. The doors to the trauma bay opened, and Margaret Chen entered with a procession behind her 2 NCIS agents, a Navy captain in dress blues, and a woman in civilian clothes who moved with the unmistakable authority of someone who answered to very few people. Commander Devereaux. The Navy captain stepped forward, his chest full of ribbons and his expression carefully neutral. "I'm Captain Morrison, Special Operations Command. This is Agent Webb from NCIS," and he hesitated. "Dr. Sarah Holloway, Deputy Director of Naval Intelligence." Rachel straightened. A deputy director didn't show up at 4 a.m. for a routine hospital visit. "Ma'am." "Sir." She nodded to each in turn. "How can I help?" Dr. Holloway studied Rachel with the assessing gaze of an intelligence officer. "You can start by explaining how a Navy commander with 18 years of special operations experience ended up working night shifts in a civilian ER. "I retired, ma'am. Medical discharge. PTSD. The words were automatic, the lie she'd told 100 times. I wanted to keep helping people, just in a quieter way. Holloway's expression didn't change. "And yet tonight, you diagnosed an epidural hematoma that a board-certified trauma surgeon missed, performed emergency neurosurgery in a trauma bay, and incapacitated 2 professional assassins with an improvised weapon." She tilted her head. "That's a lot of quiet." Before Rachel could respond, a sound from behind her made everyone turn. Captain Cole Garrett was awake. His eyes were unfocused, still heavy with sedation, but his hand reached out and found Rachel's arm with surprising strength. "Valkyrie." His voice was a ragged whisper. "They told me Valkyrie was here." Rachel leaned closer. "I'm here, Captain. You're safe." "The traitor." Garrett's grip tightened. I saw his face. It was. He swallowed, fighting through the fog of drugs and trauma. "Morrison. Captain Morrison. He's the one who sold us out." The silence in the trauma bay was absolute. Then everything happened at once. Morrison reached for his sidearm. Castellano was faster, tackling him to the ground before the weapon cleared its holster. The NCIS agents surged forward, cuffing the struggling captain while reading him his rights. Dr. Holloway watched it all with the cold satisfaction of someone who had suspected the truth all along. "We've been tracking a leak in Special Operations Command for 18 months, she said quietly, watching Morrison being dragged away. "We never had proof until now." She turned to Rachel. "Captain Garrett will need to testify, but thanks to you, he's alive to do it." Rachel looked at the man on the gurney, the SEAL she'd saved, the key to exposing a traitor. Then at Castellano, still breathing hard from his takedown. Then at Destiny and the nurses, at the SEALs standing guard, at the hospital that had become a battlefield and an operating theater in the same night. "I was just doing my job," she said. Holloway smiled, a thin expression that might have been approval. "No, Commander. You were doing what you were born to do." She pulled a card from her pocket and pressed it into Rachel's hand. "Naval Intelligence could use someone with your skills. If you ever get tired of quiet." Rachel looked at the card, thought about the silence of her apartment, the lonely nights, the nightmares that wouldn't stop, thought about the weight of an IV pole in her hands, the satisfaction of saving lives, the feeling of finally being seen. "I'll think about it," she said, and for the first time in 8 months, she meant it. The sunrise painted the hospital walls gold. Rachel stood in the small courtyard behind the ambulance bay, coffee cooling in her hands, watching the first light of dawn break over Virginia Beach. Somewhere inside, Captain Garrett was recovering. Somewhere else, Captain Morrison was facing questions that would end his career and possibly his freedom. And somewhere in between, Preston Whitmore III was learning that money and privilege couldn't save him from consequences. The NCIS investigation had uncovered everything: the kickbacks, the overdose deaths, the cover-ups. His medical license would be suspended by the end of the week. Destiny appeared at her side, holding 2 cups of coffee. Figured you could use a refill. She handed one to Rachel. Hell of a night. Yeah. Rachel took the cup. It was. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the sky lighten. So, Destiny finally said, "Commander." "Huh?" Rachel smiled, a real smile, one that reached her eyes. "That was a long time ago. Doesn't seem like it." Destiny nudged her shoulder. "You saved that man's life. You stopped those assassins. You probably prevented a national security disaster." She shook her head. "And here I thought you were just a nervous new nurse with social anxiety." Rachel thought about her grandmother's words. The measure of a person isn't in the battles they win. It's in how they live when the fighting's done. She'd spent 8 months trying to live without fighting, trying to be invisible, trying to pretend that the woman she'd been was gone forever. But maybe that wasn't what her grandmother had meant. Maybe living wasn't about leaving the fight behind. Maybe it was about choosing which fights were worth having, which lives were worth saving, which moments were worth everything. "Hey, Destiny?" "Yeah, thank you." Rachel turned to face her friend. "For believing in me, even when you didn't know who I really was." Destiny's eyes softened. "Girl, I knew who you were the first day you walked in here. I just didn't know the details." She raised her coffee cup. "To new beginnings?" Rachel lifted her own cup, touched it to Destiny's. "To new beginnings." Somewhere inside the hospital, a monitor chirped. A baby cried. A family received good news. Life went on, as it always did, in the sacred space where death and healing walked hand in hand. And Rachel Devereaux, Commander Rachel Devereaux, call sign Valkyrie, Navy Cross recipient, and night shift nurse, walked back into the emergency department. There was work to be done. There were always lives to save.